Ex-convicts, what is the worst thing you have ever seen a guard do while in prison? Once saw a CO stomp the back of an inmate's head and watched the heel of his boot literally scalp the guy. Huge chunk of head meat and hair stuck to a black boot still sits fresh in my memory, yet it was 6 years ago. Same guard was smuggling in spice and heroin. The inmate probably owed a debt is my speculation. Edit. Spices and synthetic marijuana. I had a friend whose brother was a prison guard. He had some stories, but the only one I remember was a time when there was a prisoner in solitary for a while who had become very attached to a praying mantis that had somehow made its way into his cell. The mantis lived with him for quite some time and he loved it like it was his friend. One day a prison guard who wasn't aware of the mantis being important to this prisoner stepped into the cell, saw the mantis, and promptly slammed his hand down on it to kill it. The prisoner was, understandably, devastated. I'm a CO. And one of the worst things I ever saw was an officer kidney punch a handcuffed inmate. Naturally, I reported it. That officer is now a deputy warden. Specifically, my deputy warden. True story. I worked at a max facility and I was super respectful. No need not to be ever. And the men there were always super respectful back. It's frustrating that other officers didn't realize this and administration didn't realize that the same officers who kept having issues were having issues because they were starting it. I really enjoyed my job. I was super strict because I have a fear of getting in trouble. I communicated well and seriously never had issues. My favorite memory was I was working straight 16-17 hours shifts for 27 days in a row before I was scheduled for a major surgery. The inmates knew because it was a small prison and no one keeps their mouth shut lol. But I was sitting in the guard box on the yard and I looked at my watch and it was 1700 and blinked and it was 1800 and an inmate is tapping on the window, letting me know second shift was on so I wouldn't get in trouble. I obviously didn't mean to fall asleep. I was just exhausted. It was just a super nice thing to do. My friend was in prison recently and told me this story. They were caught with drugs in their cell. The correctional officer came in with 6-8 jugs of rotten milk, popped off the lids, and set them down in the cell. He told the inmates he'd remove the jugs the next day, as long as they were still full, i.e. can't flush them down the toilet. Apparently it was a long night of gagging and being miserable. They tried to take shifts covering the jugs with their hands, but of course it was mostly futile. That said, he said it was a better alternative than the whole or other more accepted punishments. Apparently some prisons are trying to phase solitary out, and revulsion-based punishments are one alternative some places are using. Definitely stopped any of them from hiding drugs in the cell in the future, mostly out of fear of the fellow inmates kicking one's ass if they knew you risked getting that punishment for the whole cell again. A friend who did time in a federal prison told me that the intimidation by the guards is far worse than that by other inmates. I watched a guard wink and turn his back before I was multiple up-head whilst in juvenile detention. I won't say where and when, but when I arrived, the staff opened 2 cell doors to an empty day room floor. My cellmate, not having much to do except be nosy, stared out the window. It happened quickly, but he immediately recognized what was going on and mattered. Oh, here we go again. I went to look. From one door appeared a one-armed skinhead who walked towards the only other cell open. A kid, alone in his new cell, poked his head out to see why they cracked his door. He saw the skinhead and froze up. The skinhead pushed him inside and ed him up. I later found out it was staged fighting by the guards. Not sure if this counts, but here it goes. A horrible CO was as bad as they come. The other COs didn't seem to like him either. Beat up inmates, steal their stuff, made them play reindeer games, etc. One inmate just wasn't having it and was some shot caller in a Mexican gang. I don't know anything about which one or Mexican gangs in general. One day, this Mexican shot caller handed the guard pictures of hitmen following around his kids at school and even their bedrooms while they were away. Took a picture of a bullet left in the kids' rooms, and when the CO went home, sure enough it was there. This pretty much implied he was going to kill the CO's family. The CO quite. Semicolon. Edit. But to the handful of you saying this didn't happen, I will tell you I wish I lived in your fairy tale of a world. Our COs were pretty human. We had a little guy, probably 5'3", who was pretty arrogant. But we all figured that it was probably because he was afraid. Note: minimum security state prison in the late 70s. When I was on holiday, my mate got ill. He was in the pad opposite me and was bright yellow. Late one night he gets on the cell bell and the screw says, "Yeah, what's up?" Full stop. Bloke says, "Boss, I feel really weird and I can't breathe properly. I've got pains all over. I think I need a doctor." Screw tells him, "I'll send a note to healthcare in the morning." Bloke was crying, and he was a big tough gypsy motherer, and says, "Please boss, you have to get me help. It's bad." Question mark. Screw tells him to go to sleep. Next morning our wing was not unlocked. Geezer had died of renal failure and sepsis at 6 AM as guard oldn't be bothered with the hassle of calling an ambulance. Same Screw stopped 4 of us attending his service in the chapel too, as we worked in the kitchen and he wouldn't allow us to go. Hope he rots. I was in prison for 2 years. Found guilty of mugging. I didn't do it. It was my sister, and had a cell to myself. I'm a 24-year-old woman and at the time was 16. The guard by my cell would always try and flirt with me and would come into my cell and touch me. Fast forward about 8 months. Maybe 12 AM. Everyone else was asleep and to my dismay, so was the night guard. That officer opened my cell and quietly crept up on me in my sleep. He grabbed my shirt and tried to rip it off, and when I punched him he grabbed my pants. I screamed, which woke up the night guard. I don't know much of what happened after that. All I know is the dude was fired, sent to prison, and I was put with a female night guard. Moral of the story: prison guards can do pretty bad things. Watch while my friend Gus had a heart attack and refused to call 911 4 hours after he was dead on the floor of the dorm. Only did so after a bunch of us got together and ordered her to. He was long dead by that time and could not be revived, and had been in prison since the year I was born, 1988, for a murder back when he was married. Killed the dude his wife was cheating on him with, who was also his boss at the time. Don't know if is the worst thing, but the guards blackmailed my family in the visiting days so they could see me. The price? An overpriced 3L Coke, $80 approx, sold by the store inside the prison, run by the cartel. So yeah, it was cold tough. When I worked at a state prison, there were COs who got caught having sex with inmates. When you're horny, you gotta do what you gotta do. But you can't do any better than an inmate at your place of employment. Blood rushed to the wrong head there. I know a girl who was a prison guard, and she said that the male prison guards were awful to her. Like wanking in front of her and sticking together to lie about her to the bosses. The prisoners themselves were nice to her because the biggest baddest one, who was a cannibal, looked out for her after she asked him for advice about cooking meat. No joke. Let the K9 on an inmate. Happened far more than once. One of my cellmates got it once for getting in a fight. Not as bad as solitary, but still. People don't realize that there's essentially no enforceable rules that COs have to follow as long as no inmates die. Everything from just beating the out of inmates, to popping an inmate's cell door open for another inmate to pull a surprise attack. One time this one CO let this riot go on for a hot minute before he called first response. Not my story, but from someone I know. Jail or prison, I'm not sure which, in the 70s. Every night the guards took the mentally handicapped girl into another room and gang up her. Every night. I was in county and there was a super old lady in the holding area with me. Probably like 75 or 80 years old for shoplifting, and she kept telling the CO about how someone needs to check on her cats. He told her they killed them all. She just had a mental break after that. I once saw a man in segregation who was detoxing from alcohol have a seizure in his cell. The COs who responded arrived 6 deep in full riot gear with tasers and electrified riot shields, shock shields. I watched 6 grown men repeatedly electrocute and assault a man having a seizure for resisting. They wait minutes before breaking a fight. That must be the only thing. Also did nothing when I was being stabbed. Sometimes they were nice. Treated you as humans. And sometimes they beat the living hell out of you. But some are really nice one. When you figure they are just doing their jobs. I read through these posts and still can't believe if some of them are even true. I have seen weird. But not to that extent. I dunno man. I've been to prison, medium security and minimum, and never saw anything stuff being mentioned here. Lots of violence? Yes. But not weird like a dog taking a crap on someone's face. Edit. COs weren't too bad to me. Some of them were dicks but nothing I didn't expect. The only thing that really ed me off is one time my range kinda rioted. Guards came in masked up shooting pepper ball grenades through the hatches of our cell doors and dragged half the range off to seg. Next day they wake us up early and do a big search. The guards searching my cell took all of our toilet paper. I only realized when I had to take her and saw we had no TP left. Got the attention of one of the guards when she was doing her walk and told her we have no TP and asked if she can get us some. They told me she'll get it for us tomorrow. My cellie wiped our asses with ripped up t-shirts and paper ripped from novels for the rest of the day. Saw a 14-year-old kid get taken to the hole for fighting. Said some smart ass to the guards while in transit and they leg swept him and he broke several teeth on the concrete. His hands were cuffed to his waist and his legs were shackled. He had zero way to catch himself and prevent injury. Common story. Unfortunately. Youth center. So not really prison. I was in and out a lot in my later teens. And I remember this one kid was having a bad day. He must have been 16-17. And yelling refusing to follow orders of the COs. And next thing you know they're threatening to mace him. Kid says something along the lines of "I'll do it then," and next thing you know. Guard opens up the little slot and fills the room with mace. Kid starts coughing. And although I can't see into his cell I'm sure hit the floor tried to cover his face. They left him like that for a little bit. I wasn't a convict. But I was in jail for a few days at 17 for some shoplifting and vandalism. Jail is really boring so I just spent the whole time sleeping. I woke up at one point. Assuming it was late at night because everyone else was asleep. There were 3 cops sitting at a desk. Talking politics. One was expressing his concern over Trump being president because he thought he was a warmonger. I started listening to the conversation and he had some very interesting and surprisingly progressive views on recent wars and the situation in the Middle East. It was actually neat to hear what he had to say. However, for some reason the conversation took a complete 180 when his partner said, "You know, I would love to shoot a Muslim guy." After that they all starting bursting laughing and making cracks at liberal politics. You can't shoot NRS because that's sexist and many more jokes along those lines. This comment section kinda freaks me out. I ran cell phones on my compound. Never got caught. One guard in particular had heard about this but could never catch me. A week before he planted weed on me. Caught me with it. Took me to the back out of sight for a few min. Then instead of sending me to the box he let me go to make it look like I snitched on someone to get out of trouble. Backfired for him. As my name was already good on the compound and I had a rep for keeping my mouth shut so nothing bad came of it luckily. But his intention was to get me jumped poked up right before I went home. So many stories. I remember working the hole. People flooding. Throwing under the door. Walked in and said it's my shift now. I used to be a company. I quit because of all the corruption. I was threatened when I went to whistleblow because HR and the manager and all the higher ups were in on the corruption. Anyway. Our pay is pretty common. It's pretty common for COs to pay inmates or mutilate their genitals. It happens more often than you think and it's sickening. It's really unfortunate that this happens. That's why I quit. I'm studying to become a lawyer so that one day I can take them down. Fight broke out in cafeteria. Normally guards will let the fight transpire for a minute before jumping in. Mainly to let them fight it out and settle their differences. It was two dudes. A minute into the fight, one dude pulls out a knife and straight up pierces the other dude in the head. Guards were well aware of the situation and just watched. Guy bled out and they finally tackled the stabber. A solid 2 minutes had passed before they even did anything. Here in Australia you can be an ex-convict without ever having been in prison. The worst thing about prison was the Dementors. They were flying all over the place and they were scary, and then they'd come down and they'd suck the soul out of your body and it hurt. Honestly, these stories are hard to believe and I think most of them are fabricated. I was a CO in a level 3-4 prison in my state and I can assure you, none of this nonsense happened and the COs were watched like hawks to remain in compliance. Canines ting on inmates? Bull. Milk being left in solitary? Bull. I've been in a few times. Only one day max each time though. The worst thing I saw is ignoring inmates going through crises. They wouldn't give me my medicine and I had a panic attack. They straight up ignore you. It's terrifying. A lady even died in our local jail due to this. They also make you stay in a cell by yourself at first. For 24 hours at least. Doesn't sound like much, but it's very alienating and basically solitary confinement. No human contact. No books. No pen and paper. Nothing. Not even a clock. That's what ate me up the most. These are probably more systemic issues than individual guards. But yay. Shoulder put a serious tag on this bud.